back, everyone. I'm Nick, and this is Swiftful Thinking. In the last video, we connected our app to CloudKit. So our app is already connected. If you're just joining, you need to connect your app to CloudKit in order to do the code in this video. If you don't know how to do that, just check out the last video in this playlist. So in this video, we're going to now do some CRUD functions in our CloudKit container. That is creating, reading, updating, and deleting items in our CloudKit database.
Yo, welcome back. What is up, everyone? In this video, we're going to do some basic CRUD functions. That's create, read, update, delete in a CloudKit database. And in order to do that, you need your app to be connected to CloudKit. So in the last video in this series, we already connected our app to CloudKit. So if you are just joining and you're not yet connected, you're not going to actually be able to use CloudKit until you do all that setup. So I would definitely recommend watching that last video before this one. But if you are set up, you should be ready to go. So I'm going to go to our CloudKit Bootcamps folder here. I'm going to right click the navigator, create a new file, and let's create a SwiftUI view, and we will call this CloudKit, let's call it CloudKit CRUD Bootcamp. Let's click create. And we are not going to use a simulator for a second, so let's just come in here. Let's open up a canvas so we can see what we're doing quickly in SwiftUI. We have to build out a relatively quick, small UI for this video. All right, so I'm going to let's create a scroll view. Open the brackets. Inside the scroll view, let's create a VStack, open the brackets. At the top of the VStack, let's add a text that just says CloudKit CRUD. And maybe we'll press the Control Command Spacebar to open up the emojis, because everyone loves a good emoji. Let's throw in maybe some clouds, because we're in the CloudKit, of course. I'll make that a font headline. Let's make it maybe underlined. And let's move that out of our view here. So we're going to make a extension of CloudKit CRUD Bootcamp. Let's do a private var. Let's call it header of type some view. I'm just going to paste that inside, and we'll put our header at the top of the screen. Below that, let's add in a text field. Open the parentheses, and I'm in iOS 15, so we have some of these new completions here with this prompt. But my project is actually building for iOS 14, so I can't actually use this prompt yet. So I'm going to delete that. And the text field placeholder, let's say add something here, ... And then we need a binding string, of course. So let's create our view model. Let's create a class, cloud. Let's call it CloudKit CRUD Bootcamp view model. Let's conform to observable object. Let's initialize it in our view here with an @state object. Private var VM equals CloudKit CRUD Bootcamp view model. And in here, let's put our @published var. Let's just call it text of type string. Set it equal to a blank string to start, and let's bind to this text down here. We're going to use the money sign VM.text. Let's click resume. We should have our text field on the screen here. All right, let's give it let's give it a frame with a height of 55. Let's give it a background color of, let's do color.gray, maybe .opacity of 0.4. Just make it like an off gray, and let's give it a corner radius of 10. And then on the VStack, let's just add some padding. So we pop it in there. Before the background, let's actually add some padding of leading as well, just to get the text to come off the edge a little bit. Looks a little better. Let's make that a subcomponent. So down here, private var text field of type some view. Paste that in. Let's put the text field on the screen. And one more, we need a button. So let's add a button quickly and open the parentheses. Open the parentheses, and let's use the action and label. All right, The action, of course, we don't have yet, but the label we can add. Let's add a text that says add. Let's give it a frame with a height of 55 as well. Let's give it a frame with a max width of infinity. Let's give it a background of color dot maybe pink. And we'll give it a corner radius of 10 as well. And let's give it a font of headline. Foreground color of white. Let's click resume, see what it looks like. Cool. Let's take our button and make it a subcomponent. Let's create a private var. Let's say add button of type some view, open brackets. Let's paste in our button. I'm going to put the add button on the screen here. Moving faster because we've done this many times in my courses, as you already know. And I just realized that we're going to want a list down here, so we can't use a list inside a scroll view. So let's change this up a little bit. Let's change the scroll view to a navigation view. On the VStack, let's call navigation bar hidden true, so we don't actually see that top area. And then underneath the add button, let's add a list, open brackets. And for now, let's just put text saying hi, just to make sure we get the list on the screen. And of course, let's call .list style. Let's give it a plain list style. Cool. We are going to update this list in a second, but for right now, let's just start adding some items to our CloudKit database. So basically, when I open the app and I start typing and I click add, I want to send that to CloudKit. So firstly, we want a func that's called save button, that's called add button pressed, open close parentheses, open brackets. When we click this, let's first make sure that the text is not a blank string. So we'll say guard text.isEmpty. Let's make sure it's not empty with the exclamation point here. We'll say else return. So if it's empty, we just won't do anything. And let's create another private func saying add, called add item, open close parentheses, open brackets. And when we call add item, we want to pass in with a name of type string. So in add button pressed, let's call add item, and let's pass in whatever is currently in the text. I'll just note here that you also might want to check before you do anything in CloudKit that the user is connected to CloudKit. So in the last video, we did is signed into iCloud. We got their iCloud status. We should definitely be doing that before we are actually doing anything in iCloud. But we already connected to iCloud again in the last video, so we don't have to really worry about that in our simulator right now. All right. And when we call add item, we want to create an item to actually add to the database. Then we want to save it to the database. So we're going to need another function called save item, open close parentheses, open brackets. And in order to save an item, we call ck, we need to first import our CloudKit framework. And we're going to need to call ck container.default. And I'm going to type in database. And we have an option of where we want to save this data, in the public database, a shared database, or a private database. And I started talking about this in the last video. Again, your general info that will be shared between your users, so all different accounts can access that data, would go into your public cloud database. If it is private to your current user or the people that your current user have shared it with, we can put that in a private database. And that's not going to be accessible by all of your users. But for right now, let's just use the public cloud database because it's a bit simpler and probably more common. So we'll call public cloud database.save. And you can see here, we need to either save a subscription, a zone, or a record. And we're going to do a record. And of course, we don't have a record. So when we call save item, we should actually pass in a record that's of type ck record. We can pass in our record to our save function, and then we can press enter on our completion handler here. And this will be a returned record. So if it successfully saves, it'll give us back a returned record and a returned error. For right now, let's just print those out. So we'll say record, let's print out the returned record. And let's also print error. colon, and we'll print out the returned error. All right, so we need to call save item from our add item, but of course we don't have a CK record yet. So we need to create a CK record. So in here, let's say let, and we're actually going to be uploading fruits in this video. So we'll say let new fruit, and we'll set it equal to a CK record, open the parentheses, and then we need a record type. And now we need a record type, of course. So I'm going to go back to our CloudKit container, which I still have open from the last video. So in our CloudKit container, you noticed last time that the record type we have is users. And this is basically all of the data types that we have in our database here. So all I have is users, and we don't have fruits or anything like that. But fortunately, the CloudKit container is smart. So if we upload data that has a new record type, so a new name for a record type, it'll actually understand that it is a new type. So we don't even need to tell our database beforehand what we are going to upload. Instead, we can just upload a new type and it will accept it. So I'm coming back here, and the type we're going to have is fruits. Just that simple. I'm going to call it fruits, and then we can call save item, and we can pass in the new fruit, which is our record. Now, when we create this CK record, it's just going to create a plain piece of data in the database. It's not going to have any data other than the fact that the record type is fruits. So we need to add to this record all of the data that we want. So I'm going to call new fruit. And then this record works just like a dictionary. So inside the fruit, I can access a key. And the key I'm going to make right now called name. And we'll set it equal to the name that we're passing in to this add item. So we can actually add whatever keys we want here and then give them values. So if this was an existing record and we added this line of code, it would just overwrite whatever is currently in the name. But right now, there's obviously nothing in this fruit, so we can just add a new field called name, and we're going to give it the name that we pass in here. I'm going to right-click on CK record and jump to definition quickly. Just because I want to show you guys that, I wanted to show you guys in the documentation, these are all of the types that we can send directly into our CloudKit database. So name is obviously a string, so we can just send that directly. We can also send dates and data, booleans, integers, a whole bunch of really cool stuff. One thing I do want to point out though is that in here you don't see images, you don't see videos, you don't see audio, and that's because we can't send an image directly to CloudKit. Instead, when we're sending those data types, we need to first convert them into CK assets, and then we can load a CK asset to the database. All right, jumping back to our code now, this should be working. So let's call add button pressed from our view. So coming down here, we have our button. Let's call vm.add_button_pressed. And I'm going to build and run this to a simulator because my simulator is actually connected to CloudKit already. So I'm going to hide this canvas here. And let's actually make our CloudKit CRUD bootcamp the first view in our app. So I'm going to go to the app.swift file where we have our app main call, and I'm going to change from CloudKit user bootcamp. Let's use the CloudKit CRUD bootcamp. I want to reiterate one more time that if your simulator device is not connected to iCloud or CloudKit, it's not going to work. So you first need to connect, then you can go ahead and use CloudKit. So we're connected. And if we press add right now with nothing should actually happen. But let's type in maybe Apple, press add, and we got a printout here. So it looks like a record was actually created. We can see it. It's got a name field called Apple. And we can see the creator record ID. That's my personal record ID. So it knows who created it. And we got some other data here that I'll go over in a second. We have error as nil, which is great. And I just noticed that after we add the apple, obviously the text is still here. So after we get this call back here in our save function, we actually want to reset that text field. So we'll say self, and we should be a weak reference, self.text, and we'll set it equal to a blank string. I'm going to run the app one more time. And this time, let's start typing in. Let's add a orange. Let's add a watermelon. And maybe a coconut. Who doesn't love a good coconut, right? All right. And I got a quick error because we are on a background thread. So this should actually be a dispatch queue.main.async. And then we can do this in here. But we now added 4 items to the database. So let's just check them out. So I'm going to open back up my iCloud container. I'm going to reload it. And you'll see here, just like magic in our record type, we now have fruits. Let's click on it and let's try to query it. We're going to get that error message that we got before. Record name is not marked queryable. We saw this in the last video. We have to go to our indexes. We now have our fruits record type. And by default, it's giving us the ability to query, search, and sort on name, not on the record field. And let's just add a basic index for the record name. So the record name, and let's make it queryable. Save changes. And now we should be able to query on the fruits. So let's go back to our records, select fruits, let's query. And awesome. So we can see here all of the fruits in our database, and we can see the names right here: orange, watermelon, coconut. And if I go in and click on one of these, we get some other data as well. We can see that this is in the public database. We can see when it was created and when it was modified, and even cooler than that, we can see who created it and who last modified it. So this ID here, this _53B2C, that is actually my current user iCloud ID. So in the last video, we went and we queried on users. And you can see that when I query on users, the one user that we have, which is my current iCloud account, has the same name that we can see here. So by default, iCloud gives us some of this metadata on who's creating this, who is updating it, and that's really, really helpful to us as developers, because otherwise we would have to create all of these fields manually. Something else that's also really cool, I'm going to go back to our fruits because that's where we're working right now. Something else that's also really cool is that this CloudKit console is essentially like a mini CMS, because we can come in here. We can come in here and we can add records manually. I can create a new record here. I'll make it type fruits, and I'll give it a name. See, it understands already automatically that if we're creating a fruit, there's a field called name for fruits. So this is not here by default, but it's here because all of the other fruits have a name field. So I can add a new one here, and let's say peach, and click save. And just like that, I can add it to the database. I think we need to requery, and now we have our peach here. And we can also go in and click one of these. I'll click on watermelon. And we can either update data in our database, so I can add in, I can change the name. If we had other fields, we could change that data as well. Now, obviously, you don't want to get in the habit of updating these manually unless this is something like specific for your team and your admins to update. You don't want to go in and be changing all the data that your users are creating, but this is really helpful that we can do this. We can also just delete items straight from here, which deletes them permanently. I can requery. And if we click on it, one other thing that's really handy is that while we're clicked on it, we can click reload. We're not doing anything on this right now, but if we were running things in the app and it was changing data, we can just quickly reload that one piece of content and we can check if it updates. So really, really cool stuff. I'm going to go back to our Xcode projects. We've got a lot more to do in this video. I'm going to just rebuild the app to get rid of this error message here. All right, and when we're running our app now, of course we're adding items, but we're not actually fetching items. So this hi, we want this to be a list of all the fruits in our database. All right, so I'm going to close out of this quickly and let's create a function. Let's call it fetch items, open close parentheses, open brackets. And in order to fetch items, we need to call ck container.default dot, and we need to decide what database that we want to fetch from. So of course we're saving our items in the public cloud database, so we want to fetch right now from the public cloud database. And in order to fetch, we actually need to add an operation to the database. So a little counterintuitive that we are adding something in order to get something back, but we're adding a CK database operation. So of course we're going to need some sort of CK database operation. So I'm going to make that its own function. Let's say func add operation, open close parentheses, open brackets. And let's pass that in here. And we're going to pass in an operation of type CK database operation. Let's pass in the operation. And now in our fetch items, of course, we want to call add operation. Now we need a CK database operation. So up here, let's say let query equals, and we're actually going to create a CK query operation. We'll open the parentheses and we're going to pass in a query. I'm going to right click and jump to the definition of CK query operation. And I want to just show you guys that CK query operation conforms to CK database operation protocol. So we learned protocols in this series. Hope you guys are now familiar with them. But because it conforms to this, we can create a query operation and then pass it in as a CK database operation. So we're going to end up passing in our query operation directly into our add operation function. Now, of course, in order to call this, we need a CK query. So let's actually rename this to a query operation, and let's create a query. We'll say let query equals CK query, open the parentheses, and we need a record type and a predicate. So I'm going to take this query and pass it in here. And now, of course, we need a record type. So what record type do we want to query on? Well, we just made our fruits, so let's query on the fruits, of course. And then we need a predicate. So let's say let predicate. Set it equal to a ns predicate, open the parentheses, and we're going to give it a value of true. If I hold the option button and click on ns predicate, we can see that it is logical conditions used to constrain a search. Sort of like a filter basically, and here we want all of the items where record type fruits is true. So we're going to pass in the predicate here, and we should now be able to actually fetch these items. Now, one thing you're going to notice here that is a little strange is that this add operation does not have any sort of completion, right? So normally when we call these functions, they have this handy dandy completion, and we get back some data. When we call this add operation, there is no completion. And I'm not really sure why this works that way, but basically we need to add in our completion to the query operation before we add the operation to the database. So in here, let's call query operation dot, and I believe it's called query result block. So I'm going to hold the option button and click on it, and we can see that the query result block is of type operation result, which is a result that has a cursor and an error. So it's giving us one result back. I'm going to basically just copy that and set this equal to, and we'll open the brackets as if this was a closure, and we'll paste in what we're getting back here, and then we'll say in. And now I want to give this an actual local name like we do up here. So this result, let's call this returned result, just like it is. And if we do finish, let's just print and let's just say returned result, and we'll pass in the returned result here. Getting a quick error message because query result block is only available in iOS 15, and my app right now is built for iOS 14 as well. So we're going to add in this fix. So those of you who have never seen this before, basically when you have some code that's only available in certain operating systems, like this is only available in iOS 15, we can add this if available so that for users on iOS 15, we'll go into this block, and all the other users will go into this closure. So if we don't have this query result block, we then have to use the query operation dot, and it's called query completion block. And if I hold the option button and click on it, we can see that it's giving us back a cursor and an error. The only difference from the last one to this one is that these are actually coming back as two separate values rather than a single result. So I'll copy that, and in here we'll set this equal to the closure, and we'll paste this and we'll say in, and see, so now this was one single value as a result. Here we're getting two values. So this will be the returned cursor, and this will be the returned error. All right, and again, we're not really going to do anything with this. Let's just print out returned, and let's just say query completion block. And let's actually change this to query result block so we know which one we're coming through. I believe my simulator is running iOS 15, so we should get this back as well. So we're almost done, but the last thing that we need to do is actually, before we get this completion, we actually need to add all of the items that we are fetching into this operation. So it's going to work just like this, except we have different blocks. All right, and we're almost ready to actually fetch these items. So right now, if we ran this, it would query on all the fruits. It would create that query that actually finds all the fruits. And then with this result, it would return us a success. But it won't actually return us any of the fruits, because we actually need to manually add some logic so that as we're doing this query, we actually add the fruits so we can actually get them back. So just like this, we need to create two more completion blocks. So up here, let's call query operation dot record matched block. So this block is called every time we hit one of those records. So let's hit enter. I'm going to hold the option button and click on this. We can see this gives us back a record ID and a result. So I'll copy that, set this equal to a closure. Let's pass in that, and we'll say in. So this will be our returned record ID, and this will be our returned result. Now from this returned result, we can actually get the actual record that we are on here. So when, again, this is being called every time we hit a record that's in our database. So here let's switch on, let's create a switch statement, and we're going to switch on the returned result. And we're going to say case dot, and results are either going to be successful or failure. And we can see that if we are successful, we're going to get back a CK record in that success. So we'll say success let record, and let's just break for a second, and then we'll say case dot failure let error. And for right now, let's just print out the error. So here I'm just going to print error. Let's put in the record matched block, and let's just print out the error. We don't need a default case here. So in here we have this record. So let's try to get the name from that record. So we'll say guard let name equals record, and I want to access the key inside that record. So when we went to add our name, we added a key that was name. I'm going to copy that key exactly, and let's reference the key, and we'll make sure that that key is a string. So we'll say as a string else return. So if that record for whatever reason does not have a name, even though we know that all the fruits have names, then we'll just return out of this closure. If we get a name, we then want to do something with that name. So as we create this operation, we run through all these loops. So we're going to create a array for all the fruits that we get. Let's say var maybe returned items of type, and it will be an array of string. And let's set it equal to a blank array to start. And if we can get these names, let's call returned items dot append, and we'll append the name. All right, we're getting another error here because this record match block, just like down here, is only available in iOS 15. So let's fix that quick. And our fallback, we're going to call query operation dot record fetched block. If I hold the option button and click on record fetch block, we can see that this is only going to give us back the record. We're not getting the result and the ID, just a record directly. So let's set this equal to a closure, and we'll say returned record in. And now what are we going to do with this? We're going to do the same thing we do when we get this record. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it down here. So if we get the record here, let's just make sure we get the name and then append it to our returned items. All's good. This should be returned record. And so now as we are running our query operation, it's going to go through it's going to find all of the items that have record type fruits. As it goes to each item in the database, it's going to run this record match block. So it hits each item, it gets the record, we're going to get the name, and then we're going to append the names. And now we want to actually return these names when we are done with this function. So we could return it right after we append it, but every time it hits a new item, it's going to then be appending and returning, appending and returning, and that might not be a good UI for our users. So we want to actually return these items at the end of our query, which is happening actually in the completion blocks at the bottom here. So in this completion block, when we get this, we then want to add these returned items to our app. So up in our top of our view model, let's create an app published var. Let's say maybe fruits of type array of string, set it equal to a blank array. And then when we get our completion block here, let's make this a weak reference, weak self. Let's call self.fruits equal, and we'll set it equal to these returned items. Same thing in this closure. We should also make this weak. And now, with all of that done, we can finally actually fetch our items. So a lot of code to fetch the items, but once you get the hang of this, it's pretty straightforward. Let's call fetch items. So I'm going to come back up here, and let's create a init, and let's call fetch items when we initialize our view model. Lastly, let's put these fruits on the screen. So I'm going to come down here, and we have a list, and in the list, let's do for each, open the parentheses, and we're going to use the ID completion here. We're using the ID because we are looping on vm.fruits, which is an array of strings. And those strings we can identify by their hash value, which we're going to use by calling \self. That will get the hash value for each string, and this will be the content. So in here, let's just put a text, and we're going to use the money sign to 0 for each string that we are looping on. Let's run our app one more time, and when we initialize that view model, it should fetch the data. Awesome. Just like that, we have orange, coconut, apple, peach on the screen here. We can see the printout returned query result block, and it looks like I forgot to go back to the main thread again, so let's actually dispatch queue. So let's actually add a dispatch queue .main async. Let's put in our code here. I keep forgetting to do this. Let's do it down here as well. I keep forgetting to do this because I'm so used to writing Combine code, and obviously this is not Combine. This is just using escaping closures. And we may or may not be converting these into Combine in a future video in this series, but I'm not going to talk about that right now. A couple things while we're here on this fetch request I want to point out. So coming back to this predicate here. So on this query, we can actually also add a query.sort descriptors, and we can then sort the query. So right now we're just getting the data, but we can actually sort it before we get it. And this needs to be an array. We can see here is an array of ns sort descriptor. So let's just add one quickly, ns sort descriptor, open the parentheses, and I'm going to pass in a key and ascending. And here we need to add in what field we want to sort by. So let's sort by name right now, and let's make it ascending. Let's run the app one more time. And we can see now we got our same fruits back, except they are in alphabetical order. We could do descending. Let's make it false. Let's run it again. Now it's in reverse order, and we can sort by pretty much any field inside that record. So if I call here, so if I look down here at this record and I call record dot, we can see that we also get the creation date back, the creator user ID, last modified. So we can sort by any of these. So I'm going to do the creation date. So let's sort here by creation date. I'm going to delete this. And let's do creation date ascending false. So let's see what we get here. And now this was a good thing to point out actually. We get this error message down here that the field create time is not marked sortable. So let's go back to our CloudKit container here, and we're going to go to the indexes, and we're going to go to the fruits. And just like we had to do for the record name, right now we are sorting on the creation date. So the creation date is the created timestamp. I don't know why the name is slightly different here, but it's the created timestamp, and we're going to make it sortable. So let's save those changes. Let's go back to our app here. All right, let's run it one more time, and when we get this, we should see Peach is at the top of our list now. So Peach was the last item that we created, and our sending is false, so the last item should be first. If I go to the database and look at this, we can see that Peach was actually the last item that was created. So our sorting filtering is actually working perfectly. While we're on this sort, I do want to point out to you guys that right now we're getting this array of returned items, right? So we are basically, when we're done, we're just setting fruits equal to the returned items. So we could, of course, just call .sort like we do in like Combine and things, and we can sort on the items on the app directly. So after we get all of the fruits back and we want to sort them, we can do that just fine. That's totally fine. But what we want to point out though is that this sort is sorting the query, not the returned items. So if we were querying on, let's say we were querying on a very big database of 1,000 items, and maybe our query is only going to get the first 100 items. Well, if we didn't add this sort and we just got items and then sorted it, it would be 100 random items in the database. Here we are sorting the query, so it would then first sort the items in the database and then give us back the first 100. So it is important to just think about, do you want to actually sort the query, or do you want to sort or can we just sort the items after we get them on the app? And on that same note, we can also call query operation .results limit. And we can literally give it a limit on how many items we want to get back from the database. So if we only want to get 2 items, I can run it, and it's going to do this sort, and it's only going to give us the first 2 that it's only going to give us the first 2 back. So same thing, and now we just have peach and coconut. Now if I click and if I hold the option button and click on results limit, we can see that for most queries we can leave this as the default value, and it's going to give us the maximum results. And if I click on the maximum results, it's going to take me to the documentation, and it says this value, the value of this doesn't correspond with the actual number of records. CloudKit dynamically determines the actual number of records according to various conditions at runtime. So this is super annoying if you don't know about it, because you think if you're querying on something you're going to get all of the items back, but CloudKit is actually going to limit the number of items we get back even if we don't specify a maximum number of items. And you could play around with it, but it turns out that the maximum items you can get back from a CloudKit query, at least as of today, is 100 items. So even if we have 1,000 items in our database or more than that, and we do any kind of query, and even if we don't give it a limit, it's only going to give us back the first 100. So that's where these cursors come in, and we get a cursor from this returned result as well. So basically, the cursor we can use to continue the query. So we could then get the first 100, move the cursor forward, get the next 100, move the cursor forward, and so on and so forth until you get all your data. I'm not going to do that in this video because that's probably a whole video on its own. I'll cover that in the future. But I just wanted to point that out to you guys before you get confused on why your queries are limited to 100 results. So let's comment out this operations result. And last thing I want to point out here is the predicate. We can also use the predicate basically to filter on the results. So before we get all of the fruits, if we want to get a subsector of the fruits and we want to filter it first, we can use a custom predicate. So I'm going to comment this one out and let's say let predicate. And let's set it equal to an NS predicate, open the parentheses. I'm going to use the one with the format and arguments. Or is it arguments? It's argument array, sorry. So we want the argument array, which we can put in any type here. The arguments, we need this CVA list pointer. So we want the arguments array. And then here we need to add in a specific format for NS predicates. And if I hold the option button and click on this, we can get some data. It gives us a little bit of examples here on how we can use this. And we could even go and click on the predicate programming guide. And it's going to go really into detail on how we can use these NS predicates. Now, I'm not going to go into detail in this video. These are the same predicates that we use in core data, which I covered a little bit in the core data section of the last playlist. But basically, we can do something like, now our fruits only have a name, so we're just going to filter on the name. So we'll say, where the name, and this is the exact key that we have in our fruit record, equals, and we're going to do the percent and then the @ sign. And then in here, we'll pass an array of, and let's add in maybe coconut. Let's run the app one time, and we should now, even though we are querying on all the data, we should only get back the coconut. And we don't have any kind of result limit, but we're only getting back coconut because we filtered for it, basically. And this doesn't make much sense to filter on the name of an item. But if we had more complex data, and maybe we had like categories in each of these, so maybe we had like, maybe it was all just like grocery items, and then some items were fruits, some items were vegetables, some items were produce, some items were something else. We could then query on like one field inside those being the category or whatever it is. I just want to show you guys how we can do that. I'm going to comment it out and you can play with that on your own time, but let's comment this one back in. Let's get all of our fruits coming up here, and we are rocking and rolling through this video. And I want to just wrap up this video with updating records and then deleting records. So unfortunately, it is a bit more code that we have to write. I know this is getting longer than I had expected, but let's create another func called update item, open close parentheses, open brackets. And when we go to update an item, basically all we need to do is the same thing we're doing in our add item. So we get the record, except instead of creating a new record, we just take the existing record, we access that key, and we change it to whatever we want. And then when we're done, we just save it back to the database. The caveat here, of course, is that we need a reference to the actual record. So right now, as it is, right now we're just getting fruits. And once we get the name of the fruit, we don't have the actual record that that fruit is coming from. So really what we should do in our app is create a custom data type. So let's create a struct and let's call it fruit model, open the brackets. Let's conform to hashable. And in here, we obviously want our name, so we'll say let name a type string. And let's also just pass in the record of type CK record. So when we create fruit models, we're going to pass in a name and a record. So I'm going to take this and we're going to loop on fruit models then. We should get some errors in our code now. So coming down here, the returned items right now is an array of strings. Let's make it an array of fruit model. So here we will need to pass in a fruit model, open the parentheses, with a name, and we'll pass in the record. Here as well, we'll add a fruit model with the name and the record, or returned record. And coming down here, right now this will be the fruit model, so we want to access the .name inside the fruit model. And then finally, we're going to call onTap gesture. So when we tap on a name, we're going to call update item, which we want to pass in a fruit of type fruit model. So we'll say vm.update item. We should have called it update fruit, and let's pass in the money sign 0, which is the item that we are looping on. If this is confusing you guys, this is actually for fruit in, and then this could be the fruit. And then finally we can call our update item. So let's access the record. So we'll say let record equals fruit.record. And we'll say record, and then we'll access the name field. And let's just set it equal to some random name for now. So obviously we would want to add in some kind of text field in our app, but let's just add new name. And then we'll call save. And we also want to save the record. So I'm going to run the app one more time. I'm going to tap on the word peach. You can see something printed out here. It says new name. The UI did not update because we did not update it yet, but let's look at our database quickly. And so we have peach here, but if I click it and I reload it, let's reload it quick, we can see that there actually is a new name. So we updated our record. It was that easy. We can take any field and just give it a new field and save it back down to the database. And of course, we want to actually update the UI after we do it. So there's two ways pretty much to do it. The first way is after we call save item, we can just refetch all the items. So in our save item function, we can just call self.fetch items. We'll refetch. So let's run it again. Let's click on maybe the orange this time. And we updated with our new name. We refreshed all of our data. This is okay when we have relatively small apps and small data that's coming through this fetch. But if you are in a bigger app, the better way to probably do it, rather than fetching all of the items again, would probably just be updating the current item that's in your array on the screen. So after you update it, you know the database is updated, and then you can just manually update within this array. I'm not going to run through that, but you guys know it's there. And let's wrap up this video with one more func delete item, close parentheses, open brackets, and we're going to use on the list, and we're going to use that handy feature on our list. So on this for each, we can call .delete on delete, and then of course this is going to give us an index set. So in our delete item, we're going to pass in an index set of type index set. Let's say guard let index equals index set dot first else return. So this will be, usually it's just, it almost is always just one single index inside the set. Then we will call let fruit equals fruits, our fruits array will access the item at the index. And now that we have this fruit, we can get the record. So we'll say let record equals fruit.record. Finally, we can call ck container dot default dot in the public cloud database, and then of course we can just delete. And just like before, the delete, we either need to pass in a record ID, a subscription ID, or a record zone. Record ID, and let's pass in the record ID, and we'll get our completion here, and we'll say returned record ID and returned error. And if this is successful, we then want to actually update our UI as well. So we could again then just go and refetch all of the items, or we could just remove the item from the array manually. So we could just call fruits dot remove at, and then we can pass in the index, and that should remove it. Let's make this weak self. I'm not going to do any checks to make sure this is working. If there's no error, it worked. This should be this index, and this should be optional. And let's try to call from our view here. We'll call vm.delete item. Run it on the simulator one more time. Let's take this new name here and delete it. And we forgot to end. And we're getting that error again on the because we deleted from the background thread. So let's dispatch queue.main async. Pass in our fruits. Let's run it one more time. All right, let's delete this new name, and it's working perfectly. If I go back to our database and we reload it, we should have only 2 items left in our fruits, and there's only 2 here. So our database is working in real time, and we have now gone through all of the CRUD functions that creating, reading, updating, and then deleting. One thing I do want to point out here for those of you who are going to not watch the rest of these videos, I highly recommend you keep watching this CloudKit series because we're going to continue off of this. I do want to just point out, because we added this CK record directly to our fruit model here, and that's okay for this app because this app is only using CloudKit. But sometimes you might have models in your app that you might not want to be tied to this CK record. Because if you're using these models, maybe you're only using CloudKit some of the time, or maybe you're using some other database that doesn't also support CloudKit. You might not want these fruit models to be tied to CloudKit. So in the actual documentation that Apple gives us for remote records, now we haven't gotten to remote records in this video. I'm not even going to get into it in this series, but in this documentation, I just want to point out that Apple does give us some details about if we want to integrate these CloudKit records into an existing model. Their recommendation is basically to take the record and encode it and basically convert it into the record's metadata. And then we can store the metadata inside our fruit rather than the actual CK record. And then we can unarchive it and get the CK record back from that metadata. I'm not going to go ahead and do this because we don't need to do it in our app, but I just want to point it out because you may or may not want to actually keep that CK record inside your data model. Alright guys, that's enough for this video. We have done CRUD functions in CloudKit. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you were able to follow this tutorial. I know there's a lot of code here. We're going to start cleaning up some of this code in one of the future videos. But for now, hope this was enough to get you guys going. Alright, thanks for watching. As always, I'm Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I will see you in the next video.